All right. Welcome back to 1 Samuel. We're going through chapters 3 through 5 tonight. We've got a lot of ground to cover, like I said, literally and figuratively. We're going to cover a lot of ground here. This map, which we'll get to in a little while, this is approximately 75 miles from top to bottom points here. About 75 miles. So this is a little bit larger scale than we're used to when we're talking about the biblical lands.
Text me to bring the Holy Land map.
Well, maybe next time. I will have some maps. I have them already preloaded. After this video tonight comes out, if you're watching, you can go to bradflight.com/1-Samuel. That's where all this stuff is going in there. There'll be maps there. Last week's session, 1 Samuel chapters 1 and 2 is already there at bradflight.com/1-Samuel, 1 Samuel. And I have more maps that I'm going to be putting on there. One of them will look almost identical to my map because that's where I copied it from. And it's about 75 miles from top to bottom and about 40 miles from west to east. It's the largest lobe. If you've ever paid attention to Israel, it's kind of real skinny at the top, and then it kind of widens out as it follows the Mediterranean out there. And then you've got a point that comes down here to the tip of the Red Sea. So this is in the widest part of the land mass of Israel where we're talking about. It's west of the Jordan River, and Jerusalem would be somewhere like about right here. So it kind of wraps around, like not wraps around, but it's all west of Jerusalem, west of the Jordan River. The Sea of Galilee is up here, and the Dead Sea is kind of right over in here. So I'll give you an idea of where we're talking. All right. But first, we have to go into chapter 3. Now, if you remember, just as a quick recap, Elkanah he had Hannah and Peninnah. Peninnah had lots of kids. Hannah had none. She was being made fun of and being picked on, et cetera, et cetera. And then we have her praying and saying, God, if you'll give me this child, I'll give him right back to you, which Mike and I were talking after that. I don't know that I could do that. I'd be like, this is my child. It's mine, my own, my precious. You know, that whole thing.
What do you mean by give it right back to you?
She said, if you give me a child, I will put him in your service.
Let it be devoted to you always.
Yeah, devoted to you at all times, and will serve you at your house. So,
I bet a lot of moms have said that.
well, but this is an example of someone who actually did. So she was from this area right here. Okay, the name of that place, I have a hard time. Ramathaim Zuphim. Ramathaim Zuphim is right here, and so every year they'd go up to Shiloh. That's where the tabernacle was set up with the Ark of the Covenant at that time. It wasn't in Jerusalem. And that's where it was set up. And so they would go up and they'd worship. And so she would go up and worship. And at one point she said, God, I'm tired of not having a child. I want a child. Bring me a child. And if you do, I'll put him in your service here at the tabernacle at Shiloh. Well, she has the child. I'm saying 2 years minimum, up to 5, depending on how long you want to say that the child was until it was weaned. Then she took the child there, dropped him off, was like, all right, it's all yours, and walked away. And every year she would go back up and do the sacrifices, and she'd bring him a new jacket.
Do we know how old he was?
We don't know.
2 to 5, right?
Between 2 and 5. Maybe as old as 7 or 8, but golly,
So he was old enough, but he was old enough to work, right?
well,
Or learn.
ish, to learn, yes. Remember, this is a big process where you're bringing all these goats and sheep and oxen and cows and all these things, and the sacrifice is a big meat market. I mean, you're slicing, you're hauling quarters of animals. I mean, it's a labor intensive job. These priests would have been, if they were doing the job, they should have been cut, right? Because they're eating the high protein, lots of activity. These guys should have been cut, right? And so we'll get a little more into that here in just a little bit.
But some diesel priests.
Should be, right? Yep. So here we go. Chapter 3. I'm reading from the Modern English Version. If you don't have a favorite version of the Bible, get one. Find one and choose it to be your...
The version that he's reading. The
For tonight, yes. This one could be your favorite tonight, Bradford.
Every Monday.
All right. Chapter 3. Now the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli. Eli was the priest. And it says the boy Samuel. So we know he's still... he really doesn't have arm hair yet, right? Armpit hair. He's still young. And the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no vision coming forth. That means God was not using the mouth of any prophets to expand his word and his judgment on the people. It was kind of like quiet. What's God doing? Is he moving somewhere? Is he doing anything? We don't know, because we're not hearing any words from God.
He's just watching.
He's just watching, okay? Chapter 3, verse 2. At that time, Eli was laying down in his place. Now, again, we're in Shiloh, okay? So we're here nearby the tabernacle. That's where the priest would have been hanging out, okay? At that time, Eli was lying down in his place. Now his eyes had begun to grow weak, that he could not see. So Eli is on his way out. He's old. He kind of looks like Mike, okay? He's old, gray, got glasses. He's got all sorts of electronics attached to his body. He is... He's not paying attention.
It's like
You
Mike here.
ever thought how it would be, though, like if you had an helmet back then? You know, just say you had bad vision. There were no glasses back then.
Mm-hmm.
Man, you were screwed.
Yeah, you just had
bad vision.
you just had bad vision.
I mean,
Yeah.
if it was so bad you couldn't
Yeah,
think about it.
but people would take care of people too back then.
That's that culture.
That's the culture.
It still goes on that day.
Okay.
Still goes on today.
And the lamp of God had not yet gone out, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was. So where is he laying? Right there in verse 3. What do we see? The lamp of God. Remember we talked about the lamp, the menorah?
In the tabernacle?
In the tabernacle, right? The lamp of God had not gone out yet, and Samuel was lying down in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was. He wasn't in the Holy of Holies, but he was in the tent.
Right.
He's he's camping.
No, I didn't know that.
He's camping.
He was sleeping, right?
Yeah.
With the boy. I didn't know that part, though.
Yeah.
That the ark was around.
Yeah.
Huh. Interesting.
Because remember, the ark was in Exodus, and here we are in Samuel. So the ark has been around for hundreds of years at this point.
Wait, Samuel's the boy?
He's adolescent now.
He's a child right now.
Okay.
Yeah, he's a child right
so
now.
He's just like homeless, essentially living in the church.
He's been dedicated to the service of the Lord.
Just given over as a little helper.
His parents still come and visit him. His parents still come and visit him. Like, it's not like he's not like an orphan, like he doesn't know where he goes, but like, yeah.
So he's a big deal. So he's a big deal.
Just kind of wanders around. Nobody knows
So
where
it's a big
he
deal.
belongs.
Okay, verse 4. So Samuel is laying down, right, in the house of the Lord where the ark of God was. So Samuel's in the tabernacle, okay? We talked about the tabernacle in our Exodus study. He's laying down in the tent that they made, that we talked about. Isn't that cool? Then the Lord called to Samuel, and he answered, "Here I am." And he ran to Eli. Remember, Eli was laying down in his place, and his eyes had begun to grow weak. Remember, we just talked about that? And he ran to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called for me?" And he said, "I did not call." Return, lie down again. And he went and lay down. I think that translation's bad. It's probably like, "What, boy? Go back to sleep."
Yeah.
That's probably a better translation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh?
Yeah. What are you talking about? And the Lord called Samuel again. So Samuel arose and went to Eli and said, "Here I am, you called me." And he answered and said, "I did not call, my son. Return, lie down again." Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor had the word of the Lord been revealed to him. So this is a moment when God himself is literally talking to Samuel.
Man, don't you wish God still spoke in
Woo!
audible voice?
Man,
I need that.
yeah, you really do.
I mean, I need
If anybody here, you probably need it more than anybody. Now Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor had the word of the Lord been revealed to him. The Lord again called to Samuel a third time. So he arose, went to Eli, and said, "Here I am, for you called me." Then Eli understood that the Lord was calling the boy. And therefore Eli said to Samuel, "Go lie down, and it will be, if he calls you, that you will say, 'Speak, Lord, for your servant listens.'" So Samuel went and lay down in his place. Verse 10. The Lord came and stood, and he called as at other times, "Samuel, Samuel." Then Samuel said, "Speak, for your servant listens." And the Lord said to Samuel, you guys ready for this? Okay. We're in verse 11 here. The Lord said to Samuel, "See, I am doing something in Israel which will make both ears ring of everyone that hears it." So what happens when your ears start ringing? You're like, what? Right? You're trying to figure out what's happening.
My house gets so quiet, my ears will ring.
Yeah, that happens too.
But I have no kids, and I thank God. God blessed me with no kids.
God bless you.
No, I'm kidding. But my house can get so quiet, my ears was ringing the other day.
Yeah.
And I just sit there, wow, it's so freaking quiet.
It is quiet. Your ears are so used to moving.
Yeah, I think he's just trying to hear something.
Yeah.
And there's nothing there.
And there's nothing there. That's crazy. That's a quiet house. So I'm doing something in Israel which will make both ears ring of everyone that hears it. In that day I will bring about against Eli everything which I have spoken with regard to his house, from beginning to end. For I told him that I will judge his house forever for the guilt which he knew, because his sons are cursed, and he did not rebuke them. Therefore I have sworn to the house of Eli that the iniquity of Eli's house shall not be atoned for with sacrifice nor offering forever. Now, I don't know if you understand what's saying here, but basically God is saying to Samuel, Eli, the guy who you're kind of working under, your boss, basically, he has these bad sons. And his sons have done such terrible things that I don't want to deal with them anymore. And the dad, Eli, he didn't spank his kids like he was supposed to. And so he's held responsible for not rebuking them for being sinful in the presence of serving under the name of the Lord. And so I'm going to take them off the face of the planet, and there's no sacrifice or offering that they can make that would make me stop from doing this.
Wow.
I mean, he has his mind made up. God is going to punish Eli and his sons.
So he's going to kill him.
He's going to kill him.
Well, see, they were working in the temple, Eli's sons, and there were a bunch of crooks who were ripping everybody off.
Yep, and sleeping with women, and yeah.
They were taking advantage of people.
Yeah.
And, God didn't take lightly to that. Not in the Holy of Holies, not in the temple.
Not in the temple. I mean, God doesn't like sin, but definitely you don't pervert his house, right? So, verse 15. I like that it says this because I think this is real. It says in verse 15, Samuel lay until the morning. God just spoke to exactly. God just spoke to me in person, because it says he stood in the tabernacle there.
So he's about to kill my boss.
And he's about to kill my boss and his sons, and there ain't nothing they can do about it. Okay, I'm just going to lay here then, because, oh my.
Wait till morning.
Yeah, I'll wait till morning time to.
That's something I would do.
I would be scared. I would be scared.
But that tells you, though, that he's used to God's voice. Because I don't think that was the first time.
No, it says it was the first time.
Oh, it does?
Yeah, right over here.
I don't think I would have got out of bed.
Verse 7 says, Samuel did not yet know the Lord, nor had the word of the Lord been revealed to him.
Even though he worked in the
Well, he was a kid. We don't know exactly how old he was, but he was a kid.
No,
Likely.
I meant Eli.
Yeah. Oh, Eli, yeah.
Not Eli.
Eli, yeah, that dude, he's already done. But Samuel, now I'm guessing he's probably in between the ages of 7 up to age 12. And the reason I say age 12, because in the Jewish culture, age 12 is the age of accountability.
Have you seen the movie about Samuel?
No.
It's pretty good.
And so the age of accountability says you're not just a child making stupid child decisions. You need to be held accountable for knowing what's right and wrong. And now you're held accountable for that.
Isn't that puberty over there? That's considered puberty?
Basically. Mm-hmm. I mean, you still got people like Bradford that still are working through it. So he's like, woohoo! Yeah, tell that to the law.
I miss testing, please.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know. All right, so verse 15, Samuel lay until the morning. He was scared, I'm betting. Then he opened the doors of the house of the Lord. Now Samuel feared to report the vision to Eli. Hey, God spoke to me, like you said he was trying to get, and it was God, it was him, and we had a conversation. And you could see Eli saying, and was a pretty surprising conversation. And what did he say? Well, he kind of said some things. It was pretty, he was very, how do you say? God just told me you're done. I mean, that's tough, right? So here we are, verse 16. Eli called Samuel and said, "Samuel, my son." And he answered, "Here I am." Which, by the way, is a little bit of poetry, because it's now God called him 3 times. Here I am. Went to Eli. It wasn't him. God called him, said, "Here I am." Then here is Eli again. "Samuel, my son." And then him saying, "Here I am." It's like just kind of poetry, right? In verse 17, he said, "What is the thing that the Lord has spoken to you?" And I'm inferring that it's like, God spoke to you, man. What'd you get, man? He spoke to wow, this is awesome. What happened? What did he say? "Do not hide it from me. Thus may God do so to you, and more also if you hide your word from out of all the things he spoke to you." He laid the guilt trip straight on him. Yes. And I could see Samuel going, "Oh, boy. Okay. All right. Fine." So, verse 18. Samuel told him everything and did not hide from him a thing. And he said, "It is the Lord. Let him do what is good in his eyes."
That's what Eli said?
That's what Eli said.
Hey, that's the right thing to say.
He's God. If that's what he chooses, then so be it. I think that is about as good a response as you could get. A little bit of wisdom. Eli, I don't feel like, was necessarily a bad person as much as Eli was a passive person. A passive person. Letting his sons, he knew about that stuff, and just kind of letting his sons run rampant through the Lord's house. He should have been stepping in and saying, no, sir, we're not doing that. You cut it out or you're done. But instead, he was like, "I'm old. My eyes are not working real good." Avoiding confrontation. Well, they're my boys. Boys will be boys. Well, apparently your boys are terrors. So, no, boys are not boys. Okay. So, verse 19, Samuel grew, and the Lord was with him, and did not let any of his words fall to the ground. All Israel, from Dan even to Beersheba, knew that Samuel was proven to be a prophet of the Lord. And the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord. Now, if you'll remember, on the website, by the way, I will put another copy of the map up there that will show you the different locations of the lands which were given to the different tribes of Israel. Okay? And if you'll remember, initially, Dan was right over in here. And they complained and whined about being right up against the Philistines all the time. Okay? So, let me pull up my notes here because I have it written down.
So they moved him pretty far away, right?
They moved him, that's right. Let's see here where it's in my notes. I have it here. In Joshua. So it's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And then in there we have Joshua, Judges, Ruth, right? So that's all before 1 Samuel. So in Joshua 19, 41 through 46, Dan gets moved from here, was whining about being close to the Philistines, gets moved to up here at the very far end. Okay? So, go back into your text, now that you know that, and I've mentioned that before, but now that you know that, look here in verse 20. Chapter 3, verse 20, it says, all Israel from Dan even to Beersheba. Well, where's Beersheba? If you remember from our Genesis study, it's down here. It's in the south part. So when he's saying from Dan to Beersheba, that doesn't sound like all of Israel. But we know that because in Joshua, they moved them. So we know that from Dan to Beersheba, all of Israel. Does that make sense now? It's just, those are little things I like to catch because unless you know your Bible, you don't know your Bible, right? So it says, all Israel from Dan to Beersheba knew Samuel was proven to be a prophet of the Lord, and the Lord appeared again in Shiloh, for the Lord revealed himself to Samuel by the word of the Lord. Now, What that's telling us right there is that they had been sacrificing at the tabernacle, but that God had not been present. Right? Think about that. They'd been making the sacrifices and checking the boxes. Hey, I did my sacrifice. Hey, I showed up to church today. Hey, I whatever. Okay? But apparently, God was not there. Because if you look over here, it says, in chapter 3, verse 1, it says, the boy Samuel was ministering to the Lord before Eli, and the word of the Lord was rare in those days. There was no vision coming forth. So we have text that tells us that God was not participating in the worship at the tabernacle in Shiloh. Okay? And then he comes to Samuel, and the Lord revealed himself to Samuel in Shiloh by the word of the Lord, and the word of Samuel came to all Israel, and he appeared again in Shiloh. So God returns under the presence of Samuel, who's going to become a godly man for the nation of Israel again. You following with me? You tracking with me here? Eli and his sons, they're done. Samuel, who was prayed for and dedicated and given to the service of the Lord at the tabernacle, they didn't say, if you'll go back and look, Hannah didn't say, and he'll serve you, Eli, at the tabernacle. She said, he's going to serve the Lord at the tabernacle. So he has believing parents, even though the God has not been there in the tabernacle, his parents are believers in the Lord. So you tracking now what's going on here? So let's go into chapter 4 now. Chapter 4, verse 1b. And Israel went out to battle against the Philistines, and they made camp beside Ebenezer. And the Philistines encamped in Aphek. Now here's Aphek over here. Ebenezer is an unknown location just to the east of Aphek. There's basically kind of a little valley, and on this side of the hill is Aphek, and on this side of the hill would be Ebenezer. We don't have like a town there. It's more like, like when you say I'm going to Gettysburg, to the Battle of Gettysburg, you're not really going to like the town of Gettysburg. You're going to the battlefield that's there. You're not really going to Ebenezer. So you're not really going to Ebenezer or Aphek here. You're really going to the battlefield that's in between that area. Is that making sense? So, verse 2 in chapter 4, the Philistines arrayed themselves in a battle line against Israel. And when the battle was over, Israel was beaten before the Philistines, who struck down on the field of battle about 4,000 men. 4,000 men, okay? So we're going to keep a tally. We're going to keep a running tally here.
Have you guys seen the advertising for the movie Medieval?
Uh-uh.
I went and seen it, but this is based on true history. Dan, dude, the way that, Medieval fits the name, fighting with swords.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm talking about, they had a battle in this movie where thousands were killed.
Mm-hmm.
It was so realistic. That's a gory way to fight.
Oh, yeah.
But how they fought back then, that I could understand why God made vultures. They eventually cleaned the battle.
Yeah, they have to get all that stuff off
You
there.
can't bury that many people.
Mm-mm.
They actually lay there until the bones are cleaned by the vulture.
Yeah.
And it was just a hard way to battle, man.
Yeah, well, I mean, you think about a bullet, for example, or even shrapnel, will hit a vital organ and you'll bleed out or you'll die instantaneously. But this, you get your arm cut off and you bleed for hours and days.
You might not die right away.
Right, exactly.
You might lay there all night long.
Yeah.
What if it didn't go through your heart? It's
bleed out.
You're still going to die in 8 hours.
Yeah, it's going to bleed out.
Even in the cowboy Indian days, these Indians would pump a guy with 5 or 6 arrows and the guy would live.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crazy way to fight, man.
It is crazy.
Barbaric.
All right, so we lost 4,000, right? Verse 3, when the people came into camp, the elders of Israel said, "Why has the Lord struck us today before the Philistines?" I know. Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord out of Shiloh to us. That it might come among us and rescue us out of the hand of our enemies. Do they act like they are counting on God to win the battle for them? No. They're counting on a good luck charm.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, but they think that's going to be.
Have you ever been playing bingo with
They
old
seem to
women?
think that has the God's power in it or something.
God's power, but not God himself. God's power, but not God himself.
Hey, listen, hey, Bradford, have you ever played bingo with old women? They have these good luck charms. It's a crazy. They have little statues. And they believe in these things. They're gonna give them good luck. And I'm talking about like bingo today. That's kind of like what's going on.
I'm thinking today.
Yeah, it is. I mean,
Yeah.
it's idols.
They're holding on to God's power in the ark, but not into God himself.
Yeah.
Okay? So good. I'm glad we crossed that bridge there. So the people sent to Shiloh. Again, remember they're basically just to the east of Aphek. They sent to Shiloh that they might bring from there the ark of the covenant of the Lord of hosts, who dwells above the cherubim. And the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. And we already know these guys they're dead men walking, right? When the ark of the covenant of the Lord came into the camp, so they brought it into the camp here, all Israel shouted with a great shout, so the ground was in an uproar. And when the Philistines heard the sound of the shout, they said, "What does this great shout in the camp of the Hebrews mean?" Then they understood that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp. They were like, "Oh man," they brought their lucky rabbit foot. Yeah, they brought their lucky rabbit's foot over here. Okay, verse 7. The Philistines were afraid when they said, "God is come into the camp." And they said, "Woe to us, for this has never happened to us before. Woe to us! Who will deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods?" Did you catch that?
Say plural?
Did you catch that?
Yeah, hey, I like that, man. Caught it.
You caught it. Are they counting on Yahweh, Jehovah God? Or are they using it as a good luck charm with all the other idols that they're worshiping, all the other gods that they're worshiping? Who will deliver us out of the hand of these mighty gods? These are the gods that struck the Egyptians with every plague in the wilderness. Not the gods that fought the Egyptian gods, right? Be strong and be men, O Philistines, lest you be servants to the Hebrews, as they have been to you. Now be men and fight. That was like you can take my body, but you can never take my freedom. So the Philistines fought, and guess what? Israel was beaten, and they fled, every man into his tent. It was a great, very great defeat, for there fell of Israel, how many? 30,000 soldiers. Oh my Lanta. 30,000 soldiers. That is basically Huntsville, Texas, gone.
Yeah. You know, it's almost like God was on the Philistine side during that battle.
So we are at 34,000 people gone. I mean, that's like...
yeah, that's a city.
That's a city. I mean, it's a small city, like Bryan, Texas.
That wiped out generations to come.
Yes. This is a problem for the Israelites. I mean, you don't have limitless people here, okay?
That's a genocide almost.
So, let's go to verse 12. I'm sorry, let's go to verse 11. Oh, I'm sorry, back to 10. That's where it says. So the Philistines fought, and Israel was beaten. They fled every man to his tent. It was a very great defeat, for there fell of Israel 30,000 foot soldiers. Now the ark of God was taken, and the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Phinehas, died. So there's check. Check. Yes.
I'm assuming.
Yeah. Check.
Were they the ones carrying the ark?
They were along with the ark, but they weren't.
So when the Philistines came and took the ark, they killed them.
Yeah.
It makes more sense. They're probably guarding.
Guarding would be a loose term. I'd say they were just hanging out with it.
Knowing their character.
Yeah, knowing their character. Yeah. So let's go to verse 12. There ran a man of Benjamin from the battle line, and he came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and with dust upon his head. Now, I don't know if you recognize this. I'm looking at you, Chris. There is a Greek mythology legend a Greek mythology legend that somebody came and told about a battle after running a number of miles. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, but I don't remember his name.
Marathon.
Because it was exactly 26 miles.
26 miles. His name is Marathon.
But the runner collapsed.
He collapsed and died after he announced it. But this is very similar distance here. Nike.
Means victory.
Victory.
Oh.
Yeah. Nike, get your shoes right now.
Just do it.
Well, Nike's victory.
So this is about the same kind of distance that we're talking about here. So a man of Benjamin from the battle line, he came to Shiloh the same day with his clothes torn and with dust upon his head. When he came, Eli was sitting on a seat by the wayside watching. So Eli was in town. Remember, he's old and his eyes don't work, right? And he's in town, apparently watching, but his eyes don't work. So I'm sure he was kind of, I mean, how do you watch when your eyes don't work? For his heart feared for the ark of God. Now the man came to tell it in the city, and all the city cried out. So they all, oh, the ark is lost, right? Everyone cried out. When Eli heard the noise of the crying, he said, what does the noise of this tumult mean? And the man hurriedly came and told Eli. Now Eli was 98 years old, which was old for that time, and his eyes were dim so that he could not see. And the man said to Eli, I am he that came out of the army, and I fled today out of the battle line. And he said, what is the word, my son? And the messenger answered and said, Israel has fled before the Philistines, and there also has been a great slaughter among the people. Your two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, are dead, and the ark is taken. I mean, he's just giving him the bad news right there. When he mentions the ark of God, Eli fell from off of the seat backward by the side of the gate, and his neck broke, and he died. For he was an old and heavy man. Now, and he had judged Israel 40 years. 98, and he had judged Israel 40 years. Now, this is one of the things I want us to pull back out. The text is telling us this. Well, I guess it's not telling us this. We're making a little bit of an inference here. But remember, we talked about the cutting up of the animals, the pulling the skin off, I have a quarter of a leg. This goes to this family, and we're going to do. These priests should be jacked, right? High protein diet, and they're moving large amounts of weight, basically, on a regular basis. And what do we see this Eli character? What does it say about him?
He's old and heavy.
He's old and fat. Old and fat. Okay? And he had judged Israel for 40 years. Okay? So I'm going to tell you right now, if he's old and fat, it's probably not because he had been working the way he should have been working. I'm not saying that maybe he was living like a politician, not like a priest. That's right.
So he started when he was 58.
Correct. Yeah. So good. I'm glad you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. Again, I could be wrong, but this is what I'm reading, and this is the reason that I'm thinking these things. Okay. So I could be wrong, and I could definitely be, when we get to heaven and I see Samuel there, but hey, what was Eli? Was he like just old and fat because he was always that way? Or?
It was probably hard to get out of shape back in those days.
Yes.
You literally had to do nothing.
Yes.
I mean, just eat.
Eat and sit down.
Because you had to walk everywhere, right?
That's correct.
So it's hard to get fat back then.
Yes, and you'd have to have a surplus of calories to do that, and they didn't have sugar, so a surplus of calories meant you were eating a lot.
Yeah.
They had honey, but rarely. Yeah. So anyway, I'm hoping that you guys are seeing why I'm calling that out.
That's like King Henry V or the 8th.
Yeah, the 8th. Yeah. All right, let's go to verse 19. We're in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 19. His daughter-in-law, Phinehas' wife, was pregnant, about to give birth. And when she heard the news that the ark of God was taken, and that her father-in-law and her husband were dead, she kneeled down and gave birth, for her pains came upon her. Now check this out. About the time of her death, the woman that stood by her said to her, do not fear, for you have borne a son. But she did not answer or regard it. She named the child Ichabod, saying, the glory is departed from Israel. because the ark of God was taken and because her father-in-law and her husband. She said, the glory is departed from Israel, for the ark of God is taken. And then she died. She named the kid. She kneels down, pushes the baby out, and they're like, you had a healthy baby boy. And she didn't say that. She goes, his name is Ichabod. And she died.
Ichabod.
That's a lot to be told. Bad news.
A lot of bad news. And as we saw,
Your name's Ichabod.
as we saw,
Yeah, horrible news. Your name's Ichabod. Oh, and she died.
Hey,
It's
remember
Ichabod.
Ichabod Crane?
Yeah, exactly.
Ichabod Crane, Sleepy Hollow, right?
Exactly. First thing I thought.
So what we see though is that God told Samuel what about the line of Eli? Your line's going to be prosperous, and you're going to have many generations of people following me? No, he said you will have no generations. No generations will become old men.
Right.
So we see God doing this work. I'm not the one saying that I'm okay with God taking these people out. He is the one who's only the one righteous to judge this.
This is like one of those things where people are like, oh, well, why do people die? Why does he let people die of cancer? It's like you can't pretend to even begin to know
Right.
what God's reasons or plans for everything. Obviously, it's for the greater good in the end.
Yeah.
But it's like, well, why did he let 35,000 people die?
Right.
It's like, I'm not going to pretend to know.
Right. Well, and the other thing is this. I had somebody tell me, they said, well, I'm basically a good person. I don't cheat on my wife. I obey the speed limit most of the time. Like, I'm a pretty good person or whatever. Like, and you're telling me that just because I don't have this Jesus character that I'm going to burn for eternity, but somebody like Charles Manson could be on death row and could give his heart to Christ and he's going to be in heaven? Like, how is that fair? And I'm like, I'm not the one who put the system in place. This is not Brad's construct. I don't understand it. Except for to say that God is holy and sin is not holy and God can't be in with holiness. And the only way to get to be in God's presence is through his son, Jesus, who was holy and was perfect and without sin. That's the basic premise of the gospel. It ain't about me. Because if it was about me, I'd be gone.
He's like, I don't murder people, so I'm a good person. I mean, I don't cut people into pieces. It's not that bad.
Well, I get his point. He is a nice guy. But it's like, and he is a good guy. Like, as far as you're looking around at people. But it's not comparing myself to other people. It's comparing myself to perfect holiness. I don't reach that. Not even close. Right? Not even Mike reaches that. All right.
He's closer, though, because he's Catholic.
Chapter 5. 1 Samuel chapter 5.
Brandy was talking, I'm sorry.
It's okay. I need to take a drink of water anyway.
She comes into class and starts to
I know. She did it.
Yeah, exactly. She's gonna be like, well,
The woman you gave me.
Snake said it was snake that you put here.
Well, remember Adam? He goes, the woman you gave me.
She'll say, like, the snake that you put here.
Yeah.
They both blame it on God. It's basically your fault,
Yeah. Yeah, good stuff. All right, 1 Samuel chapter 5, okay? Now the Philistines took the ark of God and brought it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. So Ebenezer, Aphek, remember I told you that? They brought it down here and over here to Ashdod. That's almost 75 miles journey. So that wasn't like an overnight trip. That was probably almost a week-long trip, okay? They took it to Ashdod. Ashdod is the kind of home territory of one of the Philistine gods called the Asherah. And the Asherah are, they would almost make like totem poles. The Asherah poles, they're almost like totem poles in the front. And this is where they would worship the god Asherah. Okay? So Ashdod is kind of that location. So they brought the Ark of the Covenant in there. And the male counterpart to the Asherah is Dagon. Now they say Dagon is the Greek transliteration of it. It's actually Dagon, D-A-G-A-N. I frankly don't care one way or another. You can call it whatever you want to call it. Yeah, tomato, right? The Philistines took the ark of God, and they brought it into the house of Dagon and set it by Dagon himself, the statue, the idol that they were worshiping. So they've got it next to this guy. I'm in 1 Samuel 5, verse 3.
So they're calling a statue an actual thing.
Correct.
They're calling an inanimate object a god.
Correct. Yes. Now, you could call your, Lamborghini Countach a god. You could call your 75-inch high-def LCD TV a god. You could call 18 rounds on Sunday morning instead of going to church your god. So I don't want to get caught up in that. Like, we call all sorts of things God. All right? But check this out. We're in verse 3 here. When the Ashdodites, instead of Ashdodians, they're Ashdodites, which, whatever, arose early in the morning, Dagon had fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord. So, Ark of the Covenant and Dagon. The next morning, Dagon's on his face. And the Ark of the Covenant is still sitting there. I have an artist interpretation I'm going to put on the website here. And one of the things you'll note is their normal illustrations that you see of Dagon has a fish tail, because Dagon is a very similar to the Hebrew word for fish. When you look at the actual Philistine archaeology, though, Dagon doesn't have a fish tail. But you'll see in the drawing that I put on there, you'll see it's got a fish tail. Okay. So verse 3.5, and they took Dagon and set him in his place again. Verse 4, when they arose early on the next morning, again, Dagon had fallen upon his face to the ground before the ark of the Lord, and the head of Dagon, the statue, and both of the palms of his hands were cut off at the threshold.
What was the statue made out of?
Probably clay. Probably like modeling clay, something like that. Exactly. Only the torso of Dagon was left to him. Therefore, neither the priest of Dagon nor any coming into Dagon's house tread on the threshold of Dagon in Ashdod to this day. All right? So it's a bad deal for Dagon and people who worship Dagon. Verse 6, but the hand of the Lord was heavy upon the Ashdodites. He desolated them and struck them with tumors. So he gave them, they look like Quasimodo looking people now, okay? They got tumors. Even Ashdod and its territories. When the men of Ashdod saw that it was so, they said, the ark of the God of Israel cannot remain with us, for his hand is heavy upon us, upon Dagon our God. So they recognize what? That it's not Dagon, it's the God of the Ark of the Covenant. Okay? He's the one in charge here. So, let's see here. So, when the men of Ashdod saw this, they said, the Ark of the God of Israel cannot remain with us, for his hand is heavy upon us. So they sent and gathered all the lords of the Philistines unto them, and said, what shall we do with the Ark of the God of Israel? And the leadership said, let the Ark of God of Israel be carried around to Gath. So here's Ashdod. Gath is right over here. Now Gath, you may have heard that town before. We'll hear it again later in a couple of chapters. So I'm not gonna spoil that for you. Okay. So we're gonna take it to Gath now. And they carried the Ark of God of Israel there. It happened that after they had carried it about, the hand of the Lord was against the city with a very great destruction. And he struck them into the city, both small and great, and tumors broke out on them. Therefore, they sent the ark of God to Ekron. This Gath, man, we don't want this thing here. Get it out of here. So, okay, take it to Ekron. So let it be written.
Who's moving it?
The Dagon leaders, the Philistines are moving it around. Yeah, it's in the Philistine camps. Now, I'm going to point out something to you here. Tumors. Tumors can miraculously just kind of show up on your body. That happens. They can just grow, okay? And, yeah, like hives or whatever. They can just show up. They can be benign or they can be malignant. Benign is just there. It's just a growth. You can leave it or you can cut it off, whatever. A malignant one is like cancer or something else like that. Okay. Now, there is some scientific evidence that shows us that there are diseases that part of the side effects of those diseases will result in tumors. Do you know of any?
Leprosy.
Leprosy is actually you've lost your sense of what hurts, and so you cut yourself and you get infections.
Yeah, a lot of times they'll lose a finger, won't even know it.
Yeah, that's because they've lost their sense of feeling.
I thought it was like spots on the skin.
Sores.
That's because they get cuts. They don't know that they got cut, and it gets infected, and they end up with these. And then you can get what's called impetigo. That's where you end up with like a staph infection. That this itches, and then I itch to this. Now this has staph infection down here, and it just.
You can die from that.
Yeah, you can die from that stuff. So another one that historically we know was a result of a disease is the bubonic plague. That was also giving people tumors, and they would die from that. It was just one of the complications, one of the side effects of that. How was the bubonic plague carried?
It was carried through fleas.
Through fleas, but they figured out finally that it was fleas on rats. Okay, so hold on with me here.
You know the Jews got blamed for that too?
The Jews get blamed for everything.
Because they killed Jesus.
Yeah. You're right. Well, that was the reason they got blamed.
Except if they didn't do it, somebody else was going to have to do it. Okay. All right. They did it to fulfill the prophecy. So.
Well, I mean, it happened to fulfill the prophecy.
Correct. All right, so, and it came about as the ark of God came to Ekron, that the Ekronites cried out, saying, they brought about the ark of God of Israel to slay us and our people. So they're hearing the terminology, like they're hearing these other towns now, and they're bringing it to Ekron, and so like, oh, here comes the ark. I guess they're trying to come kill us now.
Because you know word had already got.
Yeah, the word had already passed through there. Okay. So they sent and gathered together all the lords of the Philistines and said, send away the ark of the God of Israel and let it go again to his own place, that he might not kill me and my people. For there was a deadly destruction throughout all the city. The hand of God was very heavy there. The men that did not die were plagued with tumors, and the cry of the city went up to heaven. Okay? So we're going to stop there for tonight. But I want to let me check my notes to make sure I don't have something. The house of Dagon is a Syrian god. He's the father of gods, and also the one you give a grain offering to, because you're trying to get a grain return. Later, I don't know. I think it's actually back in Judges, but they talk about the fact that people would sacrifice their children on these altars.
Philistines did.
They would sacrifice their children. They would take that little guy right there and sacrifice him, so they could have a good to this god, so they could have a good grain crop.
It was a good time.
Can you
Well,
imagine
they were
that?
sacrificing their children to a statue. Huh?
Correct. So they can get a good grain crop.
Wow. That's crazy.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question.
He's not Philistine, so we give him a good grain crop.
No, but here's the question, though. Have you ever heard of somebody sacrificing a child because they want to have financial gain?
Maybe like put them up for adoption.
No.
Get it selling.
Aborting them.
Ooh.
I'm aborting that child so I don't have to pay to raise that child.
Yeah. Guilty.
My mom had an abortion at 15. So, I mean,
I've done that myself.
so just think about that.
Yeah, you did. I didn't do the aborting.
All right, so think about that. All right, we'll get some of that. I talked about the Hebrew transliteration that says there's a related to the fish, but he wasn't actually, like, the Philistines would have been like, why does it have a fish tail, people? Like, this doesn't make any sense.
You know,
But-
it's paganistic gods have been just disappeared through the years.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, look, just the Romans. Romans had hundreds of
Oh, yeah.
gods. And where are they at?
Yep.
Never lasted.
Yep.
Even Zeus and all that.
Well, think about it. If you pray to a god for so long and it never happens, you're going to quit praying to it.
Yeah.
Eventually.
So to end tonight, we're going to see that God is showing, I'm not a trinket. I'm not a good luck charm. You can't just take me to battle and it's going to be amazing. He goes, you've left me out of the equation. You're just taking, it'd be like, all right, let's go to battle, guys. All right, grab this chair. That's in the church. Let's grab this chair. Yeah! Like,
Well, at least paint a cross on it.
paint a cross on it in gold. I mean, but it's not, okay, there's a cross up there, up on the stage up there. So if we take that cross down and we carry in that battle, is that going to give us back? No, like we can't carry a token, right? A totem. We can't carry a thing that doesn't replace God.
Gives us more favor.
Right. That doesn't give us any more favor. So our hope shouldn't be in these things, in these religious artifacts and relics, although there's some crazy, interesting things that they've got out there. Like this was, I don't remember, like St. Peter's hand or something weird, and they got it in glass and whatever. So it's weird stuff. But like you can't worship or pray to that thing or whatever. Like that's not what God wants. He doesn't care about that stuff. God cares about you.
He's not materialistic.
He's not materialistic. I mean, think about it. The pavement in heaven is made out of gold. So he's telling you, like, these things that that you have high value on, like, you'll be walking on that in heaven.
That's our cement.
That's your cement. So he doesn't care about those things. We do, because we have this physical body and we have to feed ourselves. Huh?
We like to see things.
We do like to see things.
It's easier to do that than to have blind faith.
But we are limited by our inability to see him. But he is not limited by anything. Right? So we need to remember, don't be like Israel and just say that just because I got this gold cross around my neck, or I've got this fancy Bible, or I've got a picture where the sun rays were coming down through the cloud, it looked like one of the angels were coming down or something. Like, none of those things replace God.
Yeah.
Those are all cool things. I don't necessarily hate any of those things, but they don't replace God. Okay? So from today, we see here that Eli and his sons, Hophni and Phinehas, they were more excited about the choice meats and sleeping with the women at the tabernacle. Say, hey, well, you can get a little closer to God if you get closer to me, babe. Come on, or whatever. Like, they were sleeping with the women there. They were doing terrible things. And God was saying, you're not doing any of this to serve me. And you're the servant leaders of this worship system. He goes, I'm out. Remember? In the beginning, chapter 3, he said God wasn't here. But finally, Samuel comes in, and he's like, this guy I can work with. This guy I can work with. But before I can work with him, let's clean house. Okay? So that's where we're going when we come back next week. Thanks for coming. See you next time.